Hello and welcome to a new year of CTLN Opinion Plus. As you already know, this is a space for Latinos and the concerns of the community. This week we are speaking to Colleen Murphy, who is the Executive Director and General Counsel for the Freedom of Information Commission. Happy New Year, Colleen, and thank you for joining us.
Happy New Year, and thank you so much for having me.
The Freedom of Information Act is, in my opinion, one of the most important things that Americans have access to, but not many Americans know what it is. Could you give us a brief explanation of what the Freedom of Information Act is?
Sure. In Connecticut, we have our very own Connecticut Freedom of Information Act. There's also a federal act, which has many similarities, but a number of differences as well. But the Connecticut FOI Act applies to all records and meetings of government agencies. And the premise of the law is that the public is entitled to access government records and meetings. So the law makes clear that all government records are public records that shall be accessible to the public. And it also says that all meetings of government agencies, with exceptions, both of them have exceptions, shall be accessible to the public. And that's generally what it's about. And our commission provides a basis for citizens to come and appeal denials of access to government information.
What would some of the exceptions be to sharing public meetings?
Well, in terms of public meetings, there are exceptions for, probably the biggest one is for personnel matters. There are provisions in the law that allow an agency to close its doors if there's a sensitive personnel discussion. But it's only if the subject of that discussion agrees that the matter should be done outside of the public's view. So that's one for the public meetings realm. There's also an exception for like security strategy, if the public discussion would reveal security matters that would be harmful if generally known to the public, then the doors could be closed for that sort of thing too. There's also a provision that allows agencies to close their doors to talk about any records that are exempt from the law. And that's a whole other big category of exceptions, records that are exempt from disclosure.
Records like the Trump tax returns, maybe?
Sure. Well, in terms of tax records, there are separate statutes that essentially provide for their confidentiality. And the idea makes sense generally that, your tax records are pretty personal, right? You wouldn't want them shown to the entire world. So the law pretty much says that tax return and return information shall be confidential. But issues around whether public officials who achieve a certain rank, the president and maybe others beneath that level, whether there ought to be exceptions to that exception is certainly a good topic of debate. But they are exempt. I think traditionally presidents or people vying to become president just readily made those available, recognizing that the public might have an interest, and a legitimate one, in knowing whether the person paid taxes, what advantages they might have taken of tax codes, or whether there was any impropriety in the filing. So that's the issue there. They are generally exempt, though.
FOIA requests, my bad, often have led to discoveries of a lot of malpractice in the country, not malpractice, but a lot of unsettling information, I guess, per state and by the federal government. It is important to defend the public's access to these records, though. How often do you have to go and defend a person's right to have access to these documents and to these meetings and to the information in these meetings?
Well, we at the commission, I mean, my role at the commission is to assist individuals in getting access to information. And our commission is like a mini court. Mm-hmm. And if somebody feels that they were entitled to get some information but were not provided with it, they can come to our commission. And we receive 800 to 900 formal complaints a year seeking access or complaining that you were denied access to a meeting. So if a complaint is filed with us, our commission investigates it. We hold a hearing, and very often we will take the records that are at issue. And if there are claims that they are exempt, we will analyze that and determine whether the law supports the agency that's trying to withhold its position. And then we would order disclosure if we found that it was inappropriate to withhold. So we do that, that's a matter of regular course, and we do it for all kinds of issues, whether it's a person wants to understand the budget related to their educational system, where the dollars are going for the kids, are they going for the kids, that sort of thing, all the way up to, whether police acted appropriately. And that's, particularly now a very well-trafficked topic. Looking into police officer conduct and investigations of crime, those sorts of things. So it's what we do on a daily basis, and it's the core mission of our commission that enforces this law.
I do have a question. I know that cities also have their own version of the Freedom of Information Act. It's sometimes called a FOIA or a FOIA, depending on the city. Depending on the city's relationship and contract with the police department, could that information not be available, or would it be available? Would it go to your office directly, or would it be dealt in the city?
Any city that has just like a policy or a rule that contradicts what's in the state law would be essentially void, because there may be policies, cities don't have their own law per se. They might have adopted policies that they might call, FOI law policies. But it's really, everybody must abide by what is in the Connecticut Freedom of Information law. Our law, the state law, applies to every municipal agency and every state agency. So anything that contradicts what's in the Connecticut law wouldn't be applicable. The Connecticut law would control. So we'd be looking at the statutes that are in the state law to determine whether disclosure was appropriate or not.
That's very important to know. What is the biggest challenge in defending the public's right to information, especially during a time like this when people are requesting police records and not medical records, but police records? Sorry.
That's right. Well, medical records are sometimes an issue too. And much like tax records, they're generally exempt, but sometimes depending upon the level of responsibility an official has, there may be a need to release those. But I think the biggest challenges are, first of all, making sure people know that the Freedom of Information Act exists and can utilize it, especially in underprivileged communities or communities where English isn't their first language or a language that they're comfortable utilizing. So I think that's a big challenge that we at the Commission have been working on a little bit. Over the past number of years, kind of getting the word out that this place exists, and we're one of the only states in the country that has a commission where were you to have a Freedom of Information issue, you can come right to the commission and there's no filing fee, whereas elsewhere you would have to pay to go to court to challenge something. So I think the first issue is just the biggest challenge is making sure that people know that the law exists. And then in terms of the public officials, making sure that they understand what the rules are. And we find that, most public officials want to do the right thing, but they might be told conflicting things, conflicting policies. So education and training is probably our biggest challenge. And as public officials come and go, we're in a constant state of training those public officials. And also just, funding, as it is everywhere, funding to support our commission and the work that we do is another big challenge.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we only have a few minutes left, so I have just this very general question that I think is applicable to my community as well as every other community. How does one effectively request information so that we can avoid avoid illegal action, and how does one contact you if they do meet a challenge?
Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing is to be clear about what you want. Even if you don't know the name of a particular document, just try to be as clear as possible, because you don't want the public officials on the other end to say, well, we didn't understand what you were looking for, or we gave you this piece of paper, but we didn't know you wanted all of the exhibits that would have attached to it or the sub files underneath it. So just be clear. I would also say, too, to be as flexible as you can, because public officials on the receiving end sometimes get nervous, upset by these sorts of requests. And we find that a lot of problems arise when there's no communication. So I would say don't be afraid to communicate and be a little bit flexible. Narrow your request if it's possible to do so. Those sorts of things really help avoid, having to actually file a formal complaint here. But if you should have to do that, it's relatively easy. There's no, as I said, no filing fee. There's no official complaint that you must fill out. You simply write a letter to the commission, indicate what the agency is that you were asking for information from, or a meeting that you got rejected from. Make sure that we know what the entity is and when it occurred, and file that letter within 30 days of the time that you were denied access. And then once the letter is sent to us, the ball is in our court, and we'll review it to see if there's a legitimate issue that's been raised. We docket it. And then just so you know, too, it doesn't mean that you have to come to a formal process just by filing. We have an entire mediation session that we go through for people. So we try to continue that communication. Very important, because information, as you well know, is very often time sensitive. So we like to try to get that dialogue going as early on as possible. But if necessary, we then have to have a formal hearing and resolve it in the way I described before.
It's so good to know that this type of that general counsel exists for accessing public information. I wish more people knew about it. I'm glad that we're talking because now my community knows about it, and so I think this is vital, I guess, to the democracy of our country, I think.
Yes, I mean, I truly agree, because our democracy is based on an informed citizenry. Mm-hmm. So to be informed, you have to be able to get the information. And if you can think of any other ways that our commission could reach out to the communities, that you particularly serve, please feel free to reach us. We have an attorney here who is Spanish speaking, and she loves helping folks work through their freedom of information issues. And we've, tried to attend some events that might get the word out. We've gone to the Puerto Rican Day Parade, and we've tried to work with some of the communities to get the word out. So just keep that in mind. Contact us.
Will do. Thank you so much for talking with us, Colleen. I hope you have a wonderful new year.
You too. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
That's all the time we have. This was a very informative conversation. That was Colleen Murphy, the Executive Director and General Counsel of the Freedom of Information Commission. Tune in next week for another episode, and follow us on all of our social media handles at Twitter at CT Latino News and Instagram at CT_Latino News. I'm Savani Campos with CTLN Opinion Plus. Remember to stay safe, and I'll see you next week.